Good afternoon, everyone. We're really excited to be here to talk about the U.S. perspective. Before I jump into my conversation with Fred Jacobs, who has over 40 years in the business, running his own company, and so many years experience prior to that in the radio industry in the United States, I want to talk about a few key updates as far as what the U.S. is doing and specifically what NAB's been working on. So first up, I want to talk about Android Automotive. I know that this is something that has been a several years long project for us at NAB, but it also, started with NAB and Xperi, and we organized a global coalition of broadcasters and auto manufacturers, and some of you are here, and we really wanted to focus on full radio functionality within Android Automotive globally. So this doesn't just pertain to the US, but also worldwide. And what we did was this group engaged and created a document and drafted one with necessary additions, and also created reference designs and applications to verify the work to be implemented within Android Automotive. And I'm really happy to say that these requests have been accepted and are planned for inclusion in an upcoming release of Android Automotive that's due out later this year. This is a huge development, as far as for broadcasters and radio, as it means that radio will remain a protected app within cars or vehicles that are equipped with Android Automotive, and it ensures interoperability and commonality across platforms and implementations for the dozens of vehicles that do use Android Automotive. And this is a real powerful example of cross-industry collaboration with tech companies working together for the success of radio. So thanks to some of you who are here. I know Gregor is here. He actually helped work on this, with our NAB pilot program. So really this is something that's really important, and we're really excited that that's going to come out later this year. Next, I actually wanted to provide an update. One more slide, on radio's important role in the US. Last year when I spoke at WorldDAB, we had just introduced in the United States a bill, that was called the AM Radio in Every Vehicle Act in the US Congress. And this was specifically on the Senate side. Under this legislation, the US Secretary of Transportation would be required to establish a standard for all passenger motor vehicles in the US to come with AM radio reception and playback. This feature also, much to what we were talking about at this meeting and at this conference, would need to be clearly visible on the vehicle's dashboard. And as of this week, I'm happy to say that a majority of senators are co-sponsors of this bill. That's 61 out of 100. And in the House of Representatives, they have another version of the bill, and there are 252 of 435 co-sponsors on this bill. Radio in the United States really does have a unique role also, as far as, on top of being really popular, which I'm going to be talking about with Fred a little bit later, it's really critical in emergency alerting. The U.S. National Public Warning System, or as we call it, NPWS, predominantly uses AM stations throughout its primary entry point, or PEP stations, as you can see on the screen. These consist of radio broadcast stations that work with the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA as we call it in the U.S., that provide emergency alerts and warning information to the public before, during, and after disasters. This photo here actually is of a PEP station. It's of KHKA 1500 AM in Hawaii. This station and all PEP stations are also equipped with backup equipment, with power to provide, emergency alerts when the power goes out, when the internet's out. These are equipped to still provide this information as far as if there's an incident or a disaster. And this also ensures that the presidential communications and emergencies are also available. And it really is the initial point of broadcast that goes across to all ways that the emergency alerts are maintained. One more note on the legislation is, a few weeks ago, a subcommittee hearing on the bill for AM in Every Vehicle Act held in the House of Representatives. They passed this AM legislation to the full committee. And this full committee, NAB is expecting this to pass by the end of this month, for consideration for the full House of Representatives later this year. So I wanted to give a brief update. A lot is going on in the US before I start talking to Fred. So Fred, I want to thank you again. I'm going to pass this to Fred because he's going to go through some of the data that he went through. Fred, as I mentioned, has over 40 years of experience in the industry. And specifically, I will say, if you don't subscribe to his blog, he has been doing it for over 20 years, and it is a must-read in the United States as far as for radio. And he does it every day every day for 20 years. And he has not written tomorrow's, I confirm, so he will be writing it, and I'm sure that this conference will be a part of it.
I've got to find a Starbucks somewhere near the, I feel detached here in Prague. I know they're here, so.
They're definitely here. I saw two. So
right,
in
good.
Old Town here,
Good,
you're
good.
good.
All right.
So Fred, thanks again for being here. I want to go over two key projects, or really some initial research and reports that happened in the United States very recently. One of them is the in-vehicle visuals report, and then also your 2024 tech survey. So the first report, the in-vehicle visuals report, was put together by Q in the United States, similar to what Lawrence showed earlier, where he showed the top 10 vehicles in Europe. This one had the top 100 vehicles, correct me, in the United States, and really showcased what the displays said. So a copy of the report can be found on this QR code, because we're only going to be able to touch a few areas here, but a full copy of the report's on this photo. Can you go over a snapshot of, where things stand as far as this?
Yeah, this is a really cool study. Nobody had ever done anything like this before, and this is a really great inventory of kind of the state of the art of the most popular vehicles in the United States. And Q was so excited about how this all came out that they've pledged to do this now every year, so we'll actually be able to track progress. But here you're looking at just looking at the sample of these 100 most popular vehicles and what they had in them, and you can see they all had FM radio. They all almost had AM radio, which is kind of timely with what we were talking about with the legislation. I mean, here you all are trying to get DAB plus everywhere, and we're trying to save AM radio. So that tells you a little bit about the state of the world here in the U.S. But HD radio in 70% of these vehicles, satellite radio obviously well represented, as are Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Streaming apps only 20%, text 100, image display for radio, which we'll talk about in a moment, up at 60%. And then Tomas and Gwen talked about that ubiquitous, actually not really, radio button that we'd like to see in more vehicles, only in 36% of the vehicles that they took a look at. So this was all done by hand. No bots did this. They literally went to all these different car dealerships and checked off all these features. So this is, I think, an important study. They came away with 6 basic findings here that you can see. Very simple, but I think very important. AM/FM radio, as you saw, quite ubiquitous across the 100 vehicles. But the other side of this is that, of course, AM/FM radio does not have a dashboard monopoly like we once did 20 years ago, when the only thing in the center stack was a radio and maybe a CD player. More vehicles having built-in streaming apps, so that was a plus. The HD radio presence, which we talked about, very positive. GM, a bit of an outlier as it pertains to HD radio. And when you talk to Joe D'Angelo of Xperi, this is something that they are working on, as you might imagine. And then the text piece, which is essentially every vehicle has. So they asked each of the participants in this survey, and I was one of them, what our basic takeaways were. So here are mine. And I'm not going to go through all of these because we don't have the time, and frankly, these are not like, oh my God, earth-shattering. I think they're pretty basic. But the one that I wanted to actually highlight for a moment, and I'm a program director, which is basically synonymous with being a control freak. That's what program directors are. We like to get everything the way we want it. And so now with metadata, we absolutely have the ability to be able to program an awful lot about what is either going on our radio station, maybe what is coming up on our radio stations. It's a very exciting place to be. And so I'm personally very excited about that. We are working with program directors across the country to get them to think more strategically about what that metadata can actually do and what it can say.
I love that. And Fred, you, I know, besides Q, you also did a very popular tech survey of your own. And this is the 20th year of that survey. You know, first, congratulations. You know, as you have 20 years of data, it's really interesting how that's ebbed and flowed. The tech survey that we're going to be going over has a lot of different avenues. The one that we're going to concentrate on here, though, is directly related to this conference, which is the connected car. So we want to focus on that area. Let's dive into why do people listen to AM and FM radio in the United States, and in particular in the car. So can you share, top line, that portion of your survey?
Yeah, and this is one of my favorite slides in the entire survey, and I know Megan talked about some of these other issues too, and you're going to actually see some synergy between the Edison studies and these. What's interesting about this study is, unlike Infinite Dial or a Pew survey, these are core radio listeners. Most of these people are in radio station databases. We ganged together 500 different radio stations in the U.S., all commercial, and we generated about 32,000 responses. We gave them the list that you see on the screen here, and we asked them to tell us what are the most important reasons why you are listening to broadcast radio. So look what's sitting right up at top. Again, we saw this earlier. Radio is easy to use in the car. Now, you're never going to see that on a station billboard, hey, Rock 97, easiest to listen to in the car. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, but in fact that is a big advantage, that we have that one button solution that radio brings to the table. Look at number 2. Radio is free, right? In a world where we are used to now paying for content, whether it's video or audio, the number 2 reason why people listen to the radio is because they don't get a bill at the end of the month charging them for their radio listening. As you look down the list, you see personalities, you see music, as you might think, and then those little red E's are the emotional reasons why people listen to radio. Lindsay Mack talked a little bit about that companionship piece in her presentation, and you can see that on here as well. People feeling a connection with radio, feeling that sense of radio keeps me company. That's something that radio does that nobody else can really bring to the table.
Easy to listen to and free. Love that. And that's also kind of speaks to what everyone wants to know about, which is younger demographics and what the younger listeners, how they behave when they're listening to and doing audio consumption. So I know you specifically focused on millennials and Gen Z. Can you talk about the reasons they most likely listen to radio?
Well, you have a couple of litmus cases at home, right?
I mean,
you got a couple of kids. I mean, if any of you have teenagers, you know what's going on with radio listening. It's a little tricky, and oftentimes what you learn is that the only time they actually listen to the radio is when they're in the car. They don't listen to radio in any other setting. So this question, you can see the pie chart, how much of your overall AM/FM radio listening actually takes place in a car. About a fifth say all of it does. 3 of every 10 say most of it does. And you can see the tracking here going back about 7 years. We're pretty much in that same range all the way through. But when you look at the generations there, and you can actually see where they actually do all or most of the radio listening, the car, it is our younger generation, our Zs and our millennials. That's really where they are exposed to radio at this point.
I know we talked about this earlier as well, as far as the important features when buying a car. And when we did that research with WorldDAB, and NEB was a part of it a few years back, radio was one of the tops, obviously standard in car. I know you just did this survey, so can you talk about where the United States stands currently as far as important features when buying a new car?
So we learned that 12% of our overall sample are in the market for a new car in calendar year 2024. We give those people a list of features and ask them, what are the must-haves, the important features that you have to have in your next car? So here is the hierarchy. Bluetooth is now number 1. It passed FM radio a couple of 2-3 years ago, but FM radio is right in the hunt, mentioned by 3 out of every 4. Look down a couple of rungs, you'll see AM radio hanging in there at 35%. In fact, you'll see just to the right of FM radio and AM radio, there's a little +3 symbol there. That means each is up 3%, 3 percentage points year over year. And it's the first time we've seen them actually rise in the past few years. So we looked at that data and we thought, what's going on here? Why all of a sudden are people mentioning AM/FM radio more than they did before? And we think some of that has to do with that ad campaign that NAB did, Depend on AM Radio. radio. Talk about how vast that got, because I think it actually put AM/FM radio kind of more top of mind for consumers.
Absolutely. We have a campaign called dependonam.com, and it's been around for about a year and a half. We actually are updating spots in the United States currently, and what it is radio stations are able to air this campaign that we have in social media messages. Television stations have also supported it, and it's where viewers or listeners, depending on which medium you're on, whether it's social media or on the air, you can hear these ads, and they call in, and they're talking to their Congress people about how important it is that AM and FM radio stay in the car, and that awareness has gotten really, as you said, it's great to see that these are up, and we appreciate that you're attributing that to the campaign.
Yep. So this next slide's tricky.
Yes, this one's really interesting to me, and I was actually talking to Fred about this before. We found that people are underestimating how many people listen to AM and FM radio and overestimating other platforms. So can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, so that nasty perception versus reality thing is real, and radio is suffering even among its own core fans, like we have in our survey. So we asked this question back in 2020, and we decided to bring it back this year. So I'll walk through this, and hopefully it will be clear. So the first question was, we did it with satellite radio, Sirius XM. We asked our sample first to tell us what percentage of the population, 18 plus, are subscribers. Now, the truth is 13%. But our perception for this, back in 2020, our sample thought, no, it's got to be more, like 38%. And then this year was essentially the exact same number. So people really overestimate how many people have satellite radio. We did the same thing with Spotify. The reality for Spotify, come on, we can do this. Yes? There we go. The reality for Spotify, 27% 18 plus adults across the US population, but you can see the perception for having Spotify is quite a bit higher, 39% back in 2020 and a few percentage points higher in 24. We didn't ask podcasting last time, but we asked it this time. The reality is 35%. On an overall basis, 18 plus, but the perception was a little bit better than that. And now we come to AM/FM radio, where the Nielsen reality is 82% of 18 plus adults listen in a typical week. But our core radio listeners back in 2020 thought it was only 63%. So that's a serious shortfall, right? And then this year, yeah, even worse. So this really tells us that we have a job to do from a marketing perspective. And April and I were talking about the bobbleheads earlier, and how important actually marketing what radio is all about is. And I think when you look at a chart like this, you can really get a sense for that.
Absolutely. I know Megan talked earlier today about AM and FM listening in car in the United States. Can you talk very briefly about, what makes up a majority of listening in the car?
Yeah, we asked our respondents to think back to a typical weekday in the car, and here is the basic consumption point. And again, very similar to what you saw with Edison, 54% of consumption AM/FM radio, satellite radio 19%, and then you can see all the other subheads. Our audience is older than the overall audience because the radio listening audience is in fact older, but you can see that little box there on the right, and I'll go back to that. 54% AM/FM radio, 44% everything else. So it is getting more competitive. And then let's talk about metadata here, because we kind of touched on that earlier. What do people actually want to see from the metadata in the dashboard? So as somebody mentioned earlier, table stakes is artist and title of a song. Gotta have that in there. But you can see the next three bars there are your basic information, like traffic and weather and emergency stuff. And then the golder bars down there, very interesting. What about the song that is coming up next? What about the current game score for a soccer game or a football game that I happen to be listening to? So this is a really interesting pecking order, I think, of what people want from the metadata.
And I think we have one more slide of data, as far as, we've talked a great deal about why and how radio is consumed in vehicles. Can you go over the top reasons again, why people listen in the car? I know we talked about this, just really re-hit those.
Yeah, we're right
We only
on
have about
it. Yeah.
50 seconds left.
Well, we're going to hit it. I've got an instrumental queued up, and we're going to hit the network
Beautiful.
news at the top of the hour. Sorry, it's an old reference. What can I tell you? I'm an old radio guy. So this easiest to listen to in the car piece is very important. And we see that at or near the top in the commercial study that you see here. We also do companion surveys in public radio and Christian music radio. It's the same thing. So keep it simple, right?
Excellent.
It's really been an honor to be here. Thank you,
It is. Well,
WorldDAB.
our last slide, actually, just so you know, has our
Oh, yeah, how
information
you
on
can
it.
get our
Yeah.
stuff,
Well,
right?
yeah. So if you please feel free to take a picture of it. It has Fred's full survey on there, and then also we have access and data to the other surveys that we have. On mine, as far as the QR code, we go to our Auto Initiative dashboard page that talks about best practices in the digital dash in the United States. So again, thank you for coming across. We're excited to be here.
Thank you for having us. It's really great.
Hello, I'm Nick.
I'm Gregor. Nice to be there.
And together we are going to talk to you about something that I'm sure you're going to find absolutely fascinating, metadata and how we can better support voice reproduction and recognition in connected vehicles.
First, welcome. I think we saw this picture several times today. Sorry for being the third one, but yeah, that's where we're coming from. So audio first. So that's our base. Let's see what else we need to have in the radio.
Yeah, Google Images really got hit quite a lot with, please show me an image of an old radio. Obviously, radio has evolved as vehicle technology has evolved. So the big step from our original radio back in the 1950s was the introduction of FM stereo and the expectation that radio broadcasters would support that technological jump by transmitting stereo audio.
But that's not all. There's always something new, and sometimes in the late 80s we got RDS to see some station logos, which was nice and fine, but it always comes with a caveat, because you will always have someone who misuse it to put like everything else but the station name on it.
And of course, we've now migrated into a world of digital technology. Technology in the car has improved hugely in the last 20 years, and we like to think that we've kind of matched that by delivering the possibility of a radio experience that's genuinely digital and fits in with a modern cockpit. But it has also meant that the expectations on broadcasters to provide information and metadata has also gone up quite a lot. From our early days of just transmit mono audio to now, all of these additional parameters that need to be correct and right and mutually understood by broadcasters and manufacturers, there's a lot of opportunity for things to not quite work out the way that everyone expects it to.
Yeah, but what can I say? It's not all about how you can make it wrong, but first you need to start to deliver that, but because it's not the car manufacturers expecting it, it's our customers, it's your customers actually expecting nice metadata, pictures, text, because mostly you have the nice content, but you also need to show off. And that's really, really important, and in the end, it's not a blame. We need to work together on this. Most purposefully through WorldDAB, because we are already sitting here together, so let's do this.
So practically, the way that we do that at the moment is with a document we call the Automotive Guidelines. And the Automotive Guidelines is really the document to refer to, the instruction set on how to create a great experience of radio in modern vehicles. And it's an instruction book for broadcasters on what to provide and how to provide it and how to make sure it looks good. And it's an instruction book for manufacturers on how to acquire all of that information and display it to drivers in a way that makes sense to them and is helpful to them, and begins to answer some of those really highly requested expectations that Fred has just shown us. I can't tell you how important it is that you get the name of the current song right on your digital radio display. It's right up there at the top as one of the things that people want. You can get hold of the Automotive Guidelines document from our website. It's got a section that's quite easy to read, and then it goes headfirst into a lot of technical detail, so we should be able to cover all of the information that you need. To give you an example of something that exists within that document, there are example wireframes. This is information for both broadcasters and manufacturers on how radio could look in a vehicle. But more importantly than that, where we've got each one of these little boxes saying, this is where you should put the station logo, this is where you should put the station name, exactly how you do that. Where do you get the logo from? What size should you make the logo? How big will it be on the dashboard? So that everybody understands the same outcome.
Yeah, but that's not all, because in the end, you are in a car, you don't have time to, where is those feature, where do I find my station? I think we heard from like nearly all presenters today, we need voice to accompany that, but it's also especially about recognizing the voice, because yeah, it's easy to ask for your favorite station, but if it's called NRJ, just the characters NRJ, or is it the word energy? It's really hard for the for all the different systems to actually recognize it. Or if the station is called Antenne Bayern, and most of the customers just say, "Give me antenne," and you really need to know where you are, because it's like 100 stations which have antenna in the front or radio in the front. So that's really a tough thing to do. So it's really important, and we have more examples on the next page to get this right. And there are two possible ways to really enhance the user experience. If you, as the broadcasters, would deliver first alternative ways of describing the station, because most probably you know what you want your station to be sound like or to be talk like, but you also maybe know from different local dialects how it's actually used, like Radio 1 FM, 1 whatever, and on top, which would be like the higher step, if you would also deliver some phonemes, because that's even more describing for the recognition engine, how it's actually spelled and spoken back to the customer. Because it's one thing actually recognize the right station, but it's the other one talking back not sounding weird. So
that's my job, to talk back and sound weird.
Go ahead.
I probably shall. So the point that we want to make here is we've talked a lot about metadata, and some of that metadata is things that are directly visible and obvious to the driver. What's playing now? The radio station logo, the radio station slogan. Some of that metadata is there to help navigation in a way that isn't immediately obvious, like genre information or program descriptions. And what we're now saying is that as technology in the vehicle develops to include voice as a control surface, if you want radio to work properly in those scenarios, you need to start adding that information to your metadata. You may think that everybody calls your radio station XYZ 1FM because that's the name you've spent thousands and thousands of euros promoting and is on all your outdoor and all of your publicity, but you will probably find they don't. And there's a whole bunch of them just give it a completely different name that you'd never thought of. You need to be finding that out, and then you need to be putting that in your metadata. If you want your radio name to be said properly, so that the voice reproduction system doesn't say, now tuning into 100, you need to provide that as phonemes. So it says, now tuning into ZZZ 100 FM. When we talk about metadata not being optional, this is what we mean. If you don't do this, people who are trying to find your radio station in vehicles with voice assistants will get frustrated, and they will find a station that is understood by the voice assistant. Obviously, the other side of that has to be implemented. The information to manufacturers is, you need to do that as well. If you're getting that information from radio stations, use it, because it's there to help your drivers find the right radio stations. This is an example of some of the guidance that we give in a bit more detail. This is, if you like, our flow chart of what happens when the voice assistant gets some audio and it's trying to work out what radio station to tune into. I won't go through this flow chart here because I think you probably read it faster than I can talk about it, but it gives you an idea of if all you're providing is the text name of your radio station, you're missing so many opportunities for your drivers or your listeners to find your radio station in a vehicle that's using a voice assistant.
Thank you, because it's not a one-way street. This is, again, collaboration requested. We had this with the playbook, with, yeah, like all presentations today accumulated to this. It needs to be metadata there, but more importantly, it needs to be accurate. Not like the song we had 5 minutes before. So, and it's really crucial to combine it with the nice audio experience. So the voice metadata is really helping discover and also talk back to the customer, because not only the recognition is important to find the station, but you also want your stations to sound right if the voice assistant is talking back to your customer. And that's wrapping up into the automotive guidelines. It's a lot of standards, but these guidelines really help you to have some guardrails, and even we are using it. Even after that years, we need to use it and go to our speech department. Hey guys, there are new stuff. We need to do this. We are behind, and that's also a very nice vehicle, because WorldDAB is not doing it out of thin air. It's to help the whole industry.
So I think we've probably left you, hopefully, with the clear idea that metadata is essential to making radio work, and your new brief is to make sure that your voice metadata is as accurate as all of the other metadata that you provide. WorldDAB and RadioDNS are here to help you implement this. If this isn't clear, come and talk to us and we'll lead you through it. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll be around for questions in coffee at the end. Thank you.
It's the last session, so you've really done it. And you're the survivors. I'm very proud of you. Thank you very much for being here and hanging on for the whole session. I know sometimes it's a little bit tough to stay if you have a plane to catch and so on. So thank you very much. For those who don't know me, I'm Hans Wolter. I work for a network operator in Italy. And I have been working in the DAB sector for now 25 years, which is really a long time. So I've been seeing developing everything for over the time. And I'm really proud to see where we have gotten now. So let me introduce you again, Corinna. Corinna Drumm is Managing Director, as we said before, of the Association of Austrian Commercial Radios, the VEP, correctly, yes. And she's been working in the radio industry for over 20 years now, if that's correct. And she has been also director of the VEP since 2010, if that's very interesting. And she has been working in the management of several Austrian private radio stations over the time, and also of TV stations like Sat.1 Austria, Antenne Salzburg, Antenne Wien, and so on. And since 2019, she has also been vice president of AER, which is the Association of the European Commercial Radio Stations. And Corinna has studied business administration in Trier and in Dublin. That's correct, yeah. And let's come to Javier. Javier is a senior engineer at RTVE. He has lost his voice, so I will ask him to speak not so much. And he's been head of the strategy in RTVE since 2015. And you joined RTVE in 2008, that's correct? Yeah?
That's correct.
As a head of planning and management of the spectrum licenses. And he has also been head of the European spectrum strategy at RTVE from 2014 to 2015. And you have also been elected last year in WorldDAB steering board.
Yeah.
And so the interesting part here is that Javier and Corinna represent two newcomers in DAB, two countries which are really starting energically into the DAB market from two different perspectives. Austria is being brought forward by the commercial radio stations, which is very interesting. And in Spain, we have the public service, which is pushing for the development of DAB. So we have really two different perspectives, and I think that's really interesting. So my first question is really, why is it so important to have still broadcast radio in cars? Corinna.
If you're in the last session, most of the things have been said. And I think it has been said a couple of times today that it is about easy access and about no costs, free to air. I think this is, on the listener side, a very important reason. And also what we learned today and what we know from our daily business is that people just expect to find radio, broadcast radio in their cars. They expect to find, obviously, AM in the US, and in Europe it's rather FM and DAB+. So I think this is a need which has to be fulfilled by the car manufacturers. But I don't want to bother you, and you have heard that before, so I want to bring in another idea which hasn't really been mentioned today about the importance of radio being present in the car. Radio is the medium which offers the easiest access not only to entertainment but also to information. And it also has the highest trust marks in society. It is, according to the Digital News Report, together with TV, the most used source of news. So this highlights the role of radio in our democratic societies. And I think we have to be really aware of that. It's not only about business, it's not only about listening habits, expectations, it's also about social cohesion and our democratic stability. And that's why it's also important to continue to guarantee to the listeners or the car drivers this easy access to information. And sometimes people kind of underestimate radio and they say, oh, you know, they're only talking, it's only music and so on. No, it's not. We have news at least once an hour. And for example, in Austria, 75% of the people in Austria listen to the radio every day. And the average usage time is almost 3.5 hours still. So that makes you come across news a couple of times a day. And I think for our democratic society, which is really threatened currently by platforms which disseminate disinformation, so that makes the role of radio even more important than before.
Okay. And Javier, what do you think about this? What's the position of RNE, Radio Nacional España, on this?
Yes, in the point of providing public service is very important broadcast in Spain, not only in Spain, but also in all Europe. Free to air is an essential radio. Radio is the essence of the radio. And Corinna told about social cohesion. Yeah, IP world is not for everybody, cars, but broadcast world is for everybody. Yeah, and this is very important on the perspective of a public service, because we have two gaps. The internet, for instance, is not for all people, and the age of the people who listen to radio in Spain is around 60 years. They are not very fond of using internet. And you mentioned another important, very important point is the democratic cohesion. To provide providing quality information is essential to fight against lies, fake news, polarization, and so on. And content integrity is not guaranteed on IPware, or maybe not guaranteed in a third-part platform. So broadcast provides you these features in order to provide this public service. It's essential for us to retain this public service in cars. And nowadays, the only option is, future option, is DAB+. Probably, I don't know about the future, probably if IP words guarantee some things as prominence, must carry, must offer, and other features, could be a solution. But nowadays, and in the short term or middle term, it's not a possibility for us. It's only a complement.
Okay, Javier, yeah, you mentioned, of course, DAB+. That's my second question, actually. For example, Corinna, why do commercial broadcasters want to be on the DAB+ platform in Austria, which has a very energetic and strong commercial radio market? Why DAB+ and not IP or something else?
In Austria, DAB+ has been introduced in 2019 by commercial radio stations. The public service broadcaster is up to now not part of DAB+ in Austria. We currently have about 30 DAB+ stations in Austria. Actually, next week, on Friday, there are another almost 30 stations they are going to launch next week. So we are just starting a new multiplex in Austria. So it's a highly dynamic environment which we have there. It's only, as I said, commercial radio stations. And if you look at the new stations which will go on air next week, what is quite interesting is that almost all of these new stations somehow belong to existing FM stations. I think that's good because in former years we also had some people who thought, oh, it's fun, I'm going to make some radio station, and then they found out actually it's not so easy to make a radio station, and it does cost some money, and it's not so easy to finance, and some of them disappeared again. So now we have experts in the market, we have pros in the market who really know how to make a radio station, who know how to finance it, and I think that's actually a good outlook for DAB+ in Austria. So if you ask me, why is it that the commercial stations in Austria are so big into that now and are so much taking part in that expansion of the market? I think ubiquity is the key word, and we have heard that before as well. We follow a multi-platform strategy. We have a very strong FM coverage. We have now this distribution channel of DAB+ coming up. And of course, we also have streaming. We have the radio player. By the way, the radio player in Austria also has been introduced by commercial stations. And it took the public service broadcaster, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years to take part. In the next days, I hope they will be part of that. So in Austria, in some ways, in some areas, we like to make the first steps, maybe. So we really use all these distribution channels. With FM, we all know that we have the frequency issue, the capacity issue. There's not more possible than there is before, since now. So if you want to offer more service, more programs, more ideas, and you want to do that on a broadcast level, you have to go to DAB+. So what happens now next week is that we have 30 new stations, completely new programs. One is totally Austrian music, jazz music, classical music, whatever. So we have a much higher variety for the listeners. And I think that will actually maybe even drive audio consumption. And with audio consumption, I mean the consumption of Austrian audio. Like formerly I would have called it radio, but now it's audio. It could also be on a different way. So I think this is the one thing. And the other thing is, and I mentioned that before in the last sentence more or less, we obviously prefer broadcast over streaming. And this has been made clear today a couple of times. People expect broadcast, for example, in the cars. Broadcast prevents us from gatekeepers. and allows us to master the technology of the distribution. So I think, therefore, it is clear that if we want to expand, we have FM on the one side, and on the other side, we have to also expand into DAB+. And this is what the commercial broadcasters in Austria have realized or have decided on, and that's why they are now quite highly investing in much more DAB+ stations.
Okay, yeah, that partially reminds me a little bit of our Italian story, where actually also the existing FM networks were championing the development of DAB. So it was not new entrants on the market, but the existing who were developing, let's say, introducing the new technology. I think it's very interesting what you said, that variety will bring probably also growth. And it's not just a reduction or additional competition, but it will be a positive development.
I think a lot of people are frustrated from Spotify, and I can understand that. And now we offer them more choice, and maybe there is now one listener who says, I didn't really find my music, my station until now, and now there it is. So we might have a new listener.
Yeah, I have to pay the Spotify bill for my daughter, and it's really frustrating. So, and the music is not really that good. Javier, what's the position of RTVE, RNE on DAB+? Because you're in a situation where, let's say, you started with DAB at the end of the 90s, you stopped, and now finally you're restarting with a very strange legal situation where you're forced to do still legacy DAB, but you're also trying to circumvent this and launch DAB+.
Yes, we have, sorry for this, we have a technical plan from the past century, from 1999, and obviously DAB+ was not in that plan. So legally we have the obligation to transmit the 20% of the Spanish population, Madrid and Barcelona. And our aim is to put DAB+ on the Spanish agenda. So we plan to start transmitting on DAB+ from February till the end of the year in some countries in order to say, hey, it's possible. And in parallel to open a process with private broadcasters and regional public broadcasters in order to say, hey, let's go together to a new technical plan. And nowadays we are in this process. We have conversations with the administration in order to select elements, the key elements for the new technical plan. And that's what we are doing nowadays. If everything is going well, sorry for this, we expect to the end of the year more or less have not the technical plan approved, but the first draft or something, yeah. And the first technical plan we had it was not a very good plan, because in the case of Spain, privates never wanted the old technical plan, because in 1999, not all the important radio stations were included in this plan. So privates in Spain had no option to say, hey, I want to be, no. It's like that, and stay, because we don't have a space in multiplex. So privates say, digital radio is not for us. And that was the original problem in Spain that 25 years ago came across at that moment, and it's not solved right now. So it's ridiculous. So from the part of RTVE, Radio Nacional de España, say, hey, that's all. Let's face let's focus to the future. And let's try to deploy DB Plus in Spain.
Oh, thank you, Javier. Corinna, why do you think DB Plus is important for the drivers on the Austrian market? Because I think this is very different from market to market.
I don't think so, no. I think if you compare broadcast to streaming in the car, the reason from the driver's perspective is coverage, because you just cannot be sure that you have a streaming coverage wherever you go, especially outside of urban areas. That might be very difficult to get really a signal strength there. The next thing, if you compare broadcasting to streaming, is data usage. This is also a cost issue. I mean, if you are lucky, you don't have to pay as a user, as a driver, for the data which you use, but that can easily change, and it's the same for us as broadcasters. The telcos are already up and claiming we want the media companies to pay if they use our network, so that might become more expensive. And broadcast radio is much better in that respect. And I think maybe one really of the most important reasons from the driver's perspective is simplicity and comfort. It's just easy. You don't have to muddle through some platforms and where you don't find your station and you don't find whatever, and you get to the wrong station with the right name but in the wrong destination and so on. And with the radio, you just push on radio and then there is your radio choice. Fortunately, the radio market still is a national market. That's very good, which means if you are in Austria, you see the Austrian radio stations. And you get to know them, and then you get to know which ones you like. And that makes it much more easy to listen to the radio and to use the radio. So I think from the driver's perspective, it's clear that I understand why, I don't know, 90% or more of them expect to find radio, to find broadcast radio in the car, and why this is for them really also, which was interesting for me, they mentioned that when they want to buy a car and they say, I want to have radio in there. I think that's great, and I do understand that.
Okay, thank you. I must say, coming from Italy, where the radio listening in cars is very high, I must say we have about 70% of the whole total radio listening in cars. We see a really big difference in the user experience. So you don't have interference, you don't have losing channels when you drive on long trips. It makes a really big difference, just the simplicity. Javier, I don't want to force you,
No
but
voice left.
do you think DAB in cars is something very important in Spain?
Absolutely. The listening cars is more or less like in Italy, and the prime time is in cars, as well as in Italy, as well as in Europe. When you are going to work or this is the prime time on radio, the hours of prime time. So directly we always say the same. If radio go out of the car, radio will disappear directly. For instance, for commercial sector in Spain, the revenues of advertisement will reduce dramatically if they are not in the car. So probably they want to be able to survive only in an IP world right now, yeah? Not in the future. I don't know anything about the future because we don't have a crystal ball, yeah? But the only option is broadcast. And remember that thing that is very important, the directive, the European directive, the electronic directive guarantees the presence of DAB plus receiver if you have radio in cars, but not FM receiver. So imagine that in future, some car manufacturers say, hey, no longer to FM receiver in cars, as well as medium wave or whatever. We cannot be in the future in that kind of situation, but the only way to be in cars in the midterm and the I don't know in the long term, is through DB+.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you, Corinna. Thank you very much. And thank you, Javier, also for resisting for this session. And thank you all for enduring the session. It's 3:30, and I think that's the end for it. I think Bernie is now coming on stage.
I'd like to say a big thank you and ask for an applause for Clara for her excellent moderation of today. Thank you.
Thank you very
Fabulous.
much.
Added just the sparkle we needed. And congratulations to all our wonderful speakers. I think you really all raised your game massively for this event, so we thank you and appreciate that. I tried to think of 3 key points because I've been indoctrinated by Patrick for the last 10 years, and we have to think in 3s. So my first of the 3s, well, the first, before I even go into the 3s, was just to say this event perfectly encapsulates what WorldDAB is all about. We're all about bringing together the global ecosystem of digital radio, and here it is in all its glory. So that's what we're all about. The first point I was going to make is about radio's relentlessness. I think that's what really came out, and Jackie mentioned that in her presentation this morning. And she talked about the growth of DAB in new markets, and that was echoed by Carol about Czechia, Prune about France, Corinna and Austria, Javier in Spain, and Catherine with the wonderful bobbleheads getting drivers ready to switch off FM in Switzerland. The second point that I thought came out really strongly was that broadcasters are united. And actually, I think even more strongly, it feels like there's even more determination and strength among broadcasters to be united and present a united face, and this level of determination. Megan reminded us really well in a very compelling way about the key findings of the 2 pieces of Edison research that were done for us and with other partners about just how much listeners love radio and continue to love radio. Fred and April, they confirmed that broadcast radio's dominance for drivers in the US and easy and free access to content. And Edita made, I thought, a really important point this morning when she talked about that only broadcast guarantees the provision of linear radio service with content integrity in cars. I thought that was a really important message. And the final of my 3 points was about, probably the most important, radio's prominence in the car dash. And we had a timely reminder from Roger about the role of the in-vehicle screen-based interface. And Thomas and Gwen spoke to us about the work they're doing on the EBU playbook, unifying the radio industry and crucially the public and the commercial sectors. With a single voice, working together with other partners in the ecosystem. So that was great to hear more about that. And it was encouraging to hear from Frank at Ford Motors that a broadcast radio will stay a part of vehicle entertainment systems. He said it. So a couple of quick thank yous. Thank you to all our automotive members for staying with us and helping us and through all the automotive working groups that we have and sitting here in the audience and online. Thank you to Gregor from CARIAD for chairing our automotive working group. And thank you to my colleagues in the WorldDAB project office team, to Rosie, who coordinates the automotive working group's activities, to Becky, Will and Michelle, and also to Des, who's our AV supervisor for this event. Thank you. And finally, I have an announcement to make. The WorldDAB General Assembly and Summit will take place on the 13th and 14th of November in Zagreb, Croatia. So we'll see you there. Thanks, everybody.